Time reward for your on-time presence here. I'm delighted to welcome you to the last night of our this year's Rutgers-Camden series, which is sponsored by the National Endowment of the Arts, Long May It Live, and the Campus Activities Board. And we're delighted tonight to be welcoming two of our own, Lauren Grodstein and Pat Rosal, to read from their brand new books. Introducing Lauren is MFA student Catherine Buck.
Good evening, everybody. So as we welcome everyone here to our Writers in Camden series, it does feel a little silly to welcome Lauren Grodstein here to Rutgers-Camden, as she is here teaching and running our MFA program, directing. So instead I'll say how excited I am to have her here to celebrate her new publication together as a community, as a homecoming stop on what I'm sure is a whirlwind book tour. I was first introduced to Lauren's work as an undergraduate at Rosal University, where she came and gave a reading of The Explanation for Everything, which I've since read and thoroughly enjoyed. And here at Rutgers, I've been lucky to have had two of her classes during my first year, including one last semester where she would regularly update us on the behind-the-scenes process of all the publishing going into our short history. Lauren's newest novel tells the story of Karen Newlander, a political consultant and single mother dealing with a terminal cancer diagnosis. As Karen fights for her health, she must also learn to say goodbye to her young son, while allowing him to grow closer to the estranged father he never knew. It's received a wide range of glowing reviews. Celeste Ng says it will break your heart and miraculously piece it back together. Karen Russell calls it devastating, fearlessly honest, hilarious, and gorgeously written. And an anonymous commenter on Amazon said, I sobbed through the novel and enjoyed every moment of the pain. So with that, I'm very pleased to welcome up Lauren Grodstein.
Thanks, Catherine. I have to say, it is so funny to be here as a reader, because usually I'm doing the introduction part, but it's really delightful. And I love, Catherine, how you said it. It does feel like a homecoming. I've been running around like a chicken without a head, talking about this novel, and I'm so happy to have all these friends here to read it too. I'm just going to read the beginning because that's usually the easiest place to start. And that's all you need to know. 1. When I was a kid, not much older than you, I was certain I'd grow up to be a writer. I had a portable typewriter. My dad bought it for me at a garage sale, and late at night, when everyone else was asleep, I'd sit in the kitchen and painstakingly type out little scenes and scraps of fiction. I liked mystery stories a lot, suspense, moments of horror, and surprising redemption. I hoped one day to write something about the Holocaust, but give it a happy ending. This was when I was a teenager and thought I could rewrite any script. Now I'm grown, I know that very few of us get to become the people we thought we'd be when we were kids. I never did write a novel, is what I'm saying, or even a decent short story, although I found other successes and pleasures in life and don't regret most of the things I haven't done. That said, I still have time, Jake, and I still like putting words down on paper. So I've decided to write a book for you, with chapters, a title, maybe even an appendix of photographs. It seems like the right way to tell you everything I want you to know. And this island, my sister's guest house, the cloudy Northwest, it's all very conducive to writing. I have a comfortable chair here and a shiny new laptop, and there's so much I want to tell you. As of course you know, this island where my sister lives with her family, Mercer Island, is all pine trees and lacrosse fields and half-calf Americanos. You can see the churning waters of Lake Washington from every direction, usually iron gray, but sometimes unaccountably blue. Seattle lies a few miles to the west. I've always thought it was peaceful here and good for us, although I do miss our home in Manhattan. Remember how you used to ask if we could build a tunnel from West 74th Street to Mercer Island, and because I thought I had all the time in the world, I used to say, maybe later? This will be a wonderful place for you to do the bulk of your growing up after you've moved here for good. You'll have your cousins to hang out with, and your Aunt Allie to make sure you eat your vegetables, and your Uncle Bruce is one of the most senior people at Starbucks, which means living here you will be very nicely provided for. You will learn to drive, and then you'll get a car. That said, I've instructed Allison to send you to one of the public schools on the island instead of the private cloister where she sends her own kids. Public school matters to me. I want you to know how the real world lives, or what passes for the real world here on Mercer Island. I can't bear the idea of you growing up amid all this privilege without some awareness that there are people who grow up on free lunch. Remember, Jacob, I spent my own childhood in a Long Island duplex, my father's parents in the apartment upstairs. As I've told you a million times, as I hope you remember, my mother was the fifth daughter of a Bronx postman. My father was the only child of Hungarian immigrants who barely survived World War II. Neither one of them grew up with anything like luxury, and neither did my sister or I. Allison and I frequently discuss issues of privilege and economy. She says it doesn't mean we have to raise our kids broke just because that's how we grew up. She thinks that insecurity about money doesn't necessarily make a person more empathetic or kind. Sometimes it just makes a person nervous her whole life. And she's right. I know she's right. But still, it irks me to think you'll never understand that you are, in so many ways, so very lucky. Allison says, but in at least one way you aren't lucky at all. None of us are. And money is no compensation. There is no compensation. I'm your only parent. I'm 43 years old. I have stage 4 ovarian cancer. I have perhaps 2 or 3 years left in my life, and once I am gone, you will move here to Mercer Island to live with my sister Allison and her family. You can bring your hamster and all your toys. You can bring anything you want. You know this, Jake. You know that if it were up to me, I would live forever with you in my arms. This will be a strange exercise, I can tell, writing this book. As I type, I feel like I'm writing about someone else, like this couldn't be happening to me or to us. And then, there, I feel the port above my ribs, and there it is again, the staggering truth. I still haven't decided how often I want you to think of me in the future, Jake, or what kind of memory I want to be. I mean, of course, I want you to remember me. I want you to remember that I existed and that I loved you and that generally speaking, we were pretty happy. But I don't know if I want you to remember every single specific about our life together so that your life on Mercer Island always feels like your new life, as though you're comparing it to something that came before that was somehow truer. I want this to be your true life. And I want Allison and Bruce to be like your mother and father, and your cousins to be like your siblings, and for you to consider yourself one of theirs. I want them to be your soft place to land. This is, I think, the best thing a family can be. But also, I want you to remember days like last Monday when I took you to the Woodland Park Zoo and we paid $5 to feed a leaf to that giraffe. And instead of eating the leaf, the giraffe licked your hand with its prehensile tongue. And you were so surprised you froze, and she did it again. And this time you shrieked, and I shrieked too. And then we laughed until we got the hiccups. And the zookeeper said, "I've never seen her do that before. You must be delicious." And you blushed a bit and said, "That's what my mom thinks, that I'm delicious." And oh, how you are, Jake. You with your soft, longish hair and your feathery eyelashes, you have no idea. Sometimes I find myself daydreaming, sometimes in the middle of a conversation even, and I realize I'm imagining what you'll look like in a few years. Will your hair still curl around the edges? Will you still wear Derek Jeter t-shirts every day? Since you were a toddler, you've been huge on the Yankees, but then the other day I caught you in your cousin Dustin's old Mariners jersey. I hadn't done laundry in a while, and I thought, there it is, the beginning of a kid I'll never know. The thought made me more curious than melancholy. I was like an anthropologist studying the future you. Your cousin Dustin was chasing you around the lawn while Allie yelled at both of you to come in for dinner, and I was just sitting on the dock witnessing your life without me. Dr. Susan says this sort of witnessing is normal, sort of floating away. You had a scrape on your shin I'd never noticed before. What time is it in New York anyway, Mom? You asked me at breakfast. I told you it was 11, and you said that's what you thought. You said, in New York, it's already the future. Jake, I promise, if I do nothing else with the time I have left, I will write this book. I'm not sure of its title yet. Do titles matter if you have only one reader? But I know what I'm going to include, whatever wisdom I have, whatever lessons I'd pass on to you later if I were going to be here later when you were old enough to need them. My hope is that whenever you miss me, or whenever you just want to know more about the person I was, you'll be able to open this book and read these pages and remember me. Learn more about me. And that way, even though you won't always be with me, I will always, at least a little, be with you. So I guess I'll start with this morning, which was a beautiful morning, the sunniest since we arrived a week and a half ago. Meteorological surprise. You and I were living in my sister's guest house with a view of Lake Washington and all those boats tied to all those docks. Across a broad, sloped lawn stood my sister's 5,000 square foot pile, and from the desk where I wrote, I could see you playing on the lawn between the houses, hiding in plain sight from your cousin Dustin, who didn't mind that you were terrible at hide and seek. Mom! I couldn't see you, but I could hear you. Out here, I kept the windows open whenever the sun shined. Mom, where are you? I shut off my computer, bustled down the guest house stairs. You were standing with Dustin, who'd found you, and you had rackets under each arm. We're going to play tennis, you said. We'll be back for dinner. Since when do you play tennis? Your hazel eyes narrowed. I've been practicing since we got here. Jake's got a pretty strong serve, Dustin said with a flat tone of authority, for such a little kid. You do? You want to see? Of course I wanted to see. So we marched out of the cul-de-sac and down the road to the park where, sure enough, you displayed a pretty strong serve for such a little kid. Dustin lobbed the ball back at you, and he went back and forth like 5 times before you finally missed a shot. I couldn't believe it. I had no idea you'd been playing tennis. I was shouting from the sidelines like Serena Williams' father. I was a nut. Jakey, I said, picking sweaty you up despite your weight and the lingering weakness in my arms. How come I didn't know you could play tennis? You shrugged, but you were bashful, smiling. I wanted to surprise you. I'm stunned, I said. Can we keep going now? You're squishing me. I planted myself down and watched you and Dustin practice for an hour, and even though he was going easy on you, I think he was going easy on you. You raced around the court with your lithe little body, the last trace of your toddler's potbelly gone like a dream, and I saw something athletic in you I'd never seen in myself. You looked like a child, an honest-to-God child. You were not a baby anymore in any way. When it was time to go home, you were sweaty, and your knees were scraped from a half-assed dive you took toward the end. We walked up the road, the distant hum of I-90 traffic like electricity in my ears. You swung the racket back and forth between your hands. That was awesome, Jakey, I said. I told you he was good, said Dustin. Characteristically, you said nothing. Should we sign you up for tennis lessons, honey? I asked. Someone was walking a huge slobbery dog toward us, more bear than canine. We paused to pet it, have some friendly Seattle chit-chat with its owner. After a smiley 5 minutes, we went our separate ways. Under an alley of willows, covered in dog slobber, you said, I don't know if I can handle one more thing. During the short time we'd been on this island, my days were mostly like this, a little writing, a little spending time with you. I could have done exactly that forever, but the days felt all the sweeter because I wouldn't. For dinner in the main house, your aunt was heating up a pan of my baked ziti for dinner, which you loved and which I was trying to teach her to make the right way, even though I also planned on freezing like 10,000 pans of it before I went so that whenever you miss me, there it would be, something I made for you with my own hands. Baked ziti keeps forever. Anyway, I was running a bath when I heard a knock on the door. Mom, it's me. This was around the time you'd started knocking on doors, that we'd stopped being casually naked around each other. I pulled my bathrobe tight. Come on in. You were still wearing your schmutzed-up tennis outfit, and you still had dirt on your shins. You sat down on the tight Berber carpet looking mournful. Jake? You wiped your nose on your wrist, then idly wiped your mouth. If I were my mother, I would have given you the what for. You're taking a bath, you asked? I just thought I'd relax. You're skipping dinner? You didn't like it when I skipped meals. No, I said, I'll be in a little bit. You nodded, looked out at the enormous picture window. In the darkening evening, your own small face looked back at you. Is everything okay? I still want you to do it. You do? It took me a second to figure out what you meant. Oh, I said. Are you sure? I'm sure, you said. You tried not to meet my eyes. I suppose it must have been naive of me, but I was certain that since you were so happy here, since you were settling in so nicely, you wouldn't have any interest in my finding him. What could you have possibly wanted with a stranger in New Jersey? You'd never even met the guy. You didn't know anything about him. Had always shown a laudable lack of interest in him. This was perhaps because a good third of your classmates didn't have fathers. Their moms were lesbians or 50-year-old single women who went the sperm bank route. Or maybe it's because I'd been so mentally determined to give you everything you'd ever wanted, you never had a chance to think about this one big thing you didn't have. Super sure? I asked. You shrugged again. You fiddled a bit with your shoelace, and I remembered that I really needed to teach you how to tie your shoelaces better. Super sure, you said. Well, I guess I'd been assuming the topic wouldn't come up. The story, as far as it went, was that your father disappeared when I was pregnant, which was fine with me because I was so happy to take care of you all by myself, and this was true. But then a few weeks before he left for Mercer Island, I was having a particularly bad night, and you found me sobbing and nauseated in the bathroom, and that night you asked if I thought I could find your dad. I told you I'd think about it. and that you should think about it too. I told you it would take me a month to figure out how to look for him. Of course, I was just buying time. I looked at the date on my iPhone. It had been exactly a month. Can you find his number, you asked? Probably. Okay, you said. You look just like him, the same hazel eyes, the same soft brown hair, the same full lips. He was probably a very good tennis player. When? Soon, I said. When soon? As soon as I can. All right, you said again, and now you looked at me. You look suspicious. The boiled-down version of your father. He was a one-term Democratic congressman from New Jersey, swept in by a minor Bush rebellion in 2002, swept out again in 2004. A perpetual bachelor, he was fond of Bud Light, classic rock, and Rangers games. He kept $1,000 in cash in his freezer for emergencies, and when you were born at Columbia Presbyterian, I remember nursing you and gazing out across the river, knowing that whatever else he was doing, he was not gazing back. I knew I could find him. I guess he'd understand. You said you wouldn't be upset, Mom. I'm not upset, I said. You look upset. I stood to turn off my bath. Jake, honey, I told you I'd be happy to do it, and I am. He's a nice guy. I hated lying, but it just slipped out. I'll call him this week. Okay, he said. You were old enough to fake empathy, but too young to really know how to feel for someone else. Thanks. You skipped out of the room, leaving dirt marks on the carpet and me to my bath. The cell phone buzzed. Allison. The ZD was ready. I ignored it, sank into the water, closed my eyes. Truthfully, Jacob, I hadn't seen your father since I told him I was pregnant. For all I knew, he was married, had a kid or two of his own. For all I knew, he was dead. No, he wasn't dead. Even a one-term congressman would have scored an obit in the New York Times. Throughout my pregnancy, a thoroughly decent one, I should say, not a moment of morning sickness, I thought about him all the time. I tried to imagine what he was doing, whether he was thinking about me. I was managing the Griffith senatorial campaign. This was 2006, an open seat. And I was crisscrossing Maryland twice a day, Frederick to Baltimore, Bethesda to Ocean City, pancake breakfasts, chicken dinners. Standing a step behind and just to the left of my candidate, editing stump speeches, talking to journalists, doing debate prep, running buses, fighting for more resources from the DNC. And at night, the Hampton Inn in Annapolis, the Courtyard in Chevy Chase, I'd rub my belly and I'd talk to you, Jake, and I'd tell you about everything we'd done that day. The week before the election, we were ahead in the polls by 8 points, and I knew what that would mean. It would mean a bonus. It would mean scads more work down the pike. It would mean I could hire a nanny and take you with me on the road in 2010, which I did. It would mean I would never have to call him and threaten to sue for child support. He knew how to find me, Jake, but he never did. You should know that about your father. He was a man who should have known he had a child on this earth, and never tried to find him, and never called the child's mother, and never looked across the murky, sluggish Hudson to see the newborn child nursing peacefully in his mother's arms or the tears coursing down the mother's face. I'm sorry, things are getting way too sentimental here and worse, self-pitying. I have nothing to feel sad about. I have been blessed with you, and you have been blessed with me. And your family is enormous. Here on Mercer Island, with Allie and Bruce and the kids, and at home with me and Jaleesa and your friends and teachers and Kelly the hamster, who I hope to God Jaleesa's managing to keep alive. And I know as you get older, you will create an even bigger family for yourself, more friends, more loves, a partner one day of your own, children of your own. It's late. I'm shivering. I missed dinner. I hope you can forgive me for missing dinner, Angel. I feel so sorry for myself right this second. I couldn't even believe I'm able to type. I hate self-pity. It's the most putrid of all emotions. It literally rots a person's dignity. But right now, I miss you so much, and I'm still here in this house, in this room, the same square acre as you. How could I have missed dinner with you? That's an hour we will never have again. It's the nature of this project of mine to assess where I've been and where we're all going. And Dr. Susan would say not to beat myself up about the self-pity thing. She disagrees that self-pity is putrid. She says it's natural, and that certain situations, such as this one, even call for it. And she says that I should just ride it like a wave. Remember, she says, even at the bottom of the wave, there's so much in the world that makes you happy. You are so lucky, Karen, to have so much that makes you happy. Say it out loud like a prayer. My work, my sister Allison, my niece and nephews, the Seattle sunshine. We're supposed to have another day of it tomorrow. The water slapping at the rocks below this island. You. I press a button on my phone so I can look at your face. Then I turn back to my book, to these pages, this thing I have to finish soon. I hope I have time to write it all for you, Jake. You are my happy ending. Thank you.
I cry at Coke commercials. Thank you very much, Lauren. We are thrilled now to be welcoming Pat Rosal and introducing him as Kimberly Williams.
Good evening. I'm honored to introduce our own Pat Rosal, not just because he's a fellow Sarah Lawrence alum, but he's a wonderful writer and teacher. He's the author of 4 books of poetry. Bone Shepherds was named a Small Press Highlights by the National Book Critics Circle and a notable book by the Academy of American Poets. Other awards include an Association of Asian American Studies Award and a Global Filipino Literary Award. In 2009, he was awarded a Fulbright to the Philippines. Pat's poetry gives us incredible imagery with strong narratives that reflect both his life in America and the lives of his Filipino ancestors. His poetry is suffused with music, at once highly individual, but also offering itself as universal. Publishers Weekly has called his work boisterous odes to notions of home, family, and the transcendent joy in music and dance. He shows off his extraordinary ear for poetry's sonic qualities in rhythm and consonance. Pat beautifully weaves together history, mythology, etymology, and autobiography in the final crescendo of his newest book, Brooklyn Antediluvian, which is one of the hardest titles I've ever seen. For those of us who have had the pleasure of working with Pat, he is both a master craftsman and funny as hell. He teases out fresh images from us, reminds us to listen to the music of the poem, and when he needs to, he will take us beyond our pretty lines to get at the real issue our poem really wants to talk about. Pat teaches us to accept the ghosts and ancestors that will show up in our poetry and introduces us to new poets to inspire us. Pat's class is a safe place to experiment, sometimes to cry, but always a place to laugh and learn. My pleasure, Pat Rosal.
Thank you, Kimberly. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to read a little bit from My American Kundiman, actually, I think. I'm loud, so. I'm estranged from my father right now. We've had a hard relationship, and what brought us closer together was actually me becoming a writer. And I started asking him about his life. And so out of me and my brothers, I'm the closest one to him, but yeah, some things went down and we're not talking anymore. So I want to read this poem about him. Back in like 2006 or so, I went to Argentina because a girl broke up with me. And yeah, I speak Spanish. My parents brought me up speaking English, but I speak Spanish pretty fluently, and so does my dad. But we only spoke English at home, no Filipino at all, because he wanted us to assimilate. So when I went down to Buenos Aires, I was down there for a month renting this apartment. I was like, I better let my dad know that I'm good. So I called him up, and because I'd been speaking Spanish for a couple of days, I addressed him in Spanish, and he talked back to me in Spanish, and we had this whole conversation on the phone in Spanish. And I hung up the phone, and I couldn't believe the exchange that we had just had. I realized that Spanish was a language that me and my father had never been angry at one another. So the occasion for the poem, so to say, is that phone call and that trip to Buenos Aires. As glass. When the sons of Buenos Aires holler in chorus from the muck-blessed soccer field across the street, they are calling to me in the formal idioms their fathers use to ignore the ubiquitous feral dogs and the beggars of Recoleta. I understand just enough to fling back halfway to the park's paved border their summer-toughened leather ball and return to my hard-floor Palermo flat to phone my dad back in Jersey. Papa, I say, tu hijo habla. Of course, at first, he doesn't recognize my voice or even his own name, for I am speaking to him with an affection whose prepositions point in all the wrong directions. But for 6 full minutes, we are unfamiliar with one another's rage. For once, we are laughing at the same time. It's simple. We don't loathe one another in Spanish like we do in English, a language I've long known for its fluid burn, the way it rises from my father's ankles into his belly, from his torso into his limbs like molten glass. This is why he and I can glare at one another for decades without moving, all the lexicons of sadness and delight turning cold and hard about every muscle and bone, twisting around the capillaries, flooding the metacarpal nooks, stopping in the esophagus. So if flesh, sinew, and gut, this human crucible, were to fall away as it must, what's left is the clear anatomy of a man cast in a language gone 77 years unsummoned, the whittled wooden fans of his childhood, his mother's calesa rocking over vegan cobblestone, a whore's warm breast flushed against him like a good bottle of rum, cracked cathedral windows, some cops and soup, and all 400 years of horse shit poured hot through his veins, and I am there too, sitting in a chilly apartment in Palermo, listening to the fading howls from the football field, the bold charity of a foreign tongue sweetening the image in my mind of this quickly aging man who whacked me and my brothers silly with his leather belt. And down the street, I can still hear those boys teasing one another in Lunfardo. Maybe they're not too young to despise their fathers. Maybe they can already taste in the prayers they pretend to say before they sleep that petty venom distilling in their mouths. But not today. Not in this Castilian. For today, this speech of imperial thieves, this dialect of conquerors, this larcenous parlance, I am taking back as my own. And every word of every tenderness I have failed to speak is already rising through my knees as glass. It is ancient, and it is pure. It is not free of bitterness or grief. It is heating my very fingers as I write this. I want to learn to love more fluently, even if it means in English I should shatter into the body of my father. So, really try to pay attention to what's going on in the world today. You know, Twitter, things pop right up. I was checking on Twitter today to see what was going on. Bruno Mars posted this very important thing. He's talking about how he wished that in one of his concerts that his shirt would just explode off of his chest. And he said, nah, I can't do that. That would be a bad idea. Because my third nipple would drive everybody crazy. I too have a supernumerary mammary gland. That's what it's called. A third nipple is called a supernumerary mammary gland. And I wrote a poem for it. Poem for my extra nipple. Burnt out sun, shut eye, stillborn amoeba, minuscule miscarriage of the flesh, ant head, desiccated heart, a volcano's embryo, unborn twin, budged through my breast, misplaced knuckle, I let my woman kiss me here. This brown pearl of a Longapo bay, thorn pierced inch deep into dermis, milkless gland, the aria's last note lost between armpit and sternum. It is a secret passage to the aortic contortions behind my ribs, swollen sand grain from the beach where I watched my brother nearly drown. I pray to it, this singed hint of some great-great-grandfather's sin. Come back. Two turntables and a mic. I want fat MC on the set. Two turntables and a mic. I want fat MC on the set. Two turntables, one fat MC. Two turntables and a mic. I want fat MC on the set. A scavenger's ode to the turntable, or a note to Thomas Alva Edison. We lifted the precious arm first, then the platter. We pulled free the belt and unscrewed the top. I didn't take shop or build a whole lot by hand, but I was pretty good with a knife. I poked the half-dull blade clean and gentle through the turntable's plastic. I sawed down 4 inches straight as I could make it. Me and my boys, sons of cops, bookkeepers, and ex-priests, picked up gear other DJs didn't want no more. One prep school kid who just bought a shiny new mixer tossed out his 2-month-old Newmark, which we picked from the garbage and hoisted home. We harvested the slider from the rich kid's rig. I stripped the wires tips and soldered them to pitch contacts in a basement of a maple split in Edison, New Jersey. We were learning to turn anything into anything else. While our mothers played mahjong in the sala, and our fathers bet slow horses, and the government bombed Iraq, we learned to poise pennies on the cartridge head so the diamond stylus would sit deep in the vinyl's groove. A dance floor could turn from whining to riot quick if a record skipped when we spun back the wax to its cue. We stayed awake from noon to noon, digging out from crates some forgotten voice or violin to scratch. We juggled and chirped. We perfected the grind of a downbeat and dropped it on the bass line coming round. Half trash, half hallelujah. Our hands cut Bach to Bambata and made a dance hall jump. We held one ear to the syncopated kick and the other to a future music no one else could hear. Out of a hunk of rescued junk, we built a machine to mix the classics. We faded and transformed. We chopped up masters and made the whole block bounce. 2 turntables and a mic, a 1 fat MC on the set. 2 turntables and a mic, a 1 fat MC on the set. 2 turntables, 1 fat MC, 2 turntables and a mic, a 1 fat MC on the set. That's it. I want to close with, I'm working on a new book. And this is a longish poem that is close. And I was telling Greg, I was like, man, back in the day, we used to just go hit the open mic at Bar 13 and try new poems. So I don't really get a chance to try out new work. And I felt like this is about as safe a place to try out new work. And, you know, I was also thinking about Lauren's book and this boy and absent fathers and a gone mother. And there's an epigraph to this poem. It says, "Boys don't read." It's from the experts. And I was one of those boys who didn't read. And, well, this is a poem. I think it's a poem about our interior lives. And if you haven't noticed, we're being governed by people who don't pay attention to their interior lives. Bodies in flight are also a kind of text. Boys don't read, the experts. All afternoon, I could watch a good pickup game like this, where the kids are running their sloppy fly routes in a crabgrass park. They are counting by the thousands. They read the defense and cheat the rush or jump the snap. One of them eats a nice blind side hit from a slightly older, bigger kid and buckles for half a second, then jumps to his feet. You might not notice the big kid brush the shorter one's shoulders, then shove the littler guy good and hard before he hustles toward the huddle. When I was their age, there were days no one within 9 blocks could come out to play. So I used to ride my bike to Grace Street and sit alone in the middle of the baseball field, standing up once in a while to pitch dirt bombs at the church's back wall. Its glass stained with lean, long-robed saints of Bonhamtown and a few undecipherable aphorisms of the Roman faith. Among my first urges toward ruin, to crack open an enclosure, holy or not, and set free what might roost inside. I'd imagine slinging a rock through one of the saints' heads and a plague of grackles streaming from the breach, the birds rushing out a lot like gangs of brawling boys do, spilling across an avenue underneath the second-floor neon Sichuan sign. How many times I was swift to headbutt another kid in the chin or mush some brat in the face who I thought was breathing too hard and too close at the bar, and so with a quick swat, I could set a whole downtown plaza ablaze with crews of crackling boys pouncing upon each other. Under street lamps, I bet we looked like jackdaws stomping out flames or rooks simply mauling smaller birds. Someone told me the key to peace is learning to make my mind still as a field. Like maybe the one from my childhood, with its crumbling backstop across from the abandoned cosmetics warehouse. I've often wondered if the jagged painted glass of Grace Street Church is finally nailed shut with some cheap chipboard. I keep thinking the roof has probably collapsed by now. But I'm really remembering a shrine near my mom's hometown that was bombed by Americans who thought the enemy was hiding inside. When the townspeople came to see the damage, there was a real sky in the gaping space left in place of the original sky frescoed on the dome. More wondrous, the attack knocked loose a huge statue from its perch. The 10-foot saint cut from local stone landed on its feet and was poised at the center of the altar, and thus forever blessed the site with enough power to invoke at least one pilgrimage by the grown sons and daughters of the nation's latest dictator. They knelt before that hard white figure to request their several intercessions, sobbing, prostrate, and surrounded by men strapped with armalites. But then, the local engineers and artists had been called to fix the image of heaven, the shadows of small black birds now fleeing paradise along the sun rays' golden angles of descent. I was brought up on the other side of the planet, in a Jersey neighborhood whose one field was quiet long enough to bear the silence of a 75-year-old church and a solitary 9-year-old boy testing his scrawny arm and the inherited pleasures of rage. I was 25 when my mother died. It would be several years before she came back for a quick visit. We met in that field by our old house. A leafless maple lay on its side between us. She somehow figured out I was hungry, so she turned to a line of bushes near the crown of the fallen timber and whistled. 3 notes into my mother's call, out burst a half-dozen fluttering game quail, so quick to flight, they impaled themselves on the bare branches of the fallen tree. My mom held out her arms as if to call my attention to the flapping bloody fruit. There are no photos of my mother before 1958, the year she arrived in America. I think as a child, she must have been very much like the children in our ancestral village who once accompanied me to the family cemetery. Even there, these children dart from grave to grave, reciting their own names and the distant years carved by hand. They leap from one hard marker to another, laughing in brigades. They laugh like hundreds of flocks once locked up in some musty space made sacred by so many small bodies crashing into glass. Everyone knows of boys who dream repeatedly of wings. And yet, so few of us know what to ask them the morning they wake up and feel what it's like to be changed by pain. Every generation, there's another kid on the wrong side of the world who stops praying in a dusty field to lift a stone so he can begin to understand what it's like to wish for the same thing for the rest of his life, promising to spring every body of every ghost from every shackle and every old wood hold. It took me decades to salvage my sadness from books. Tell me again that boys don't read. Even their hothead fathers and us drunken uncles, too terrified to listen, somewhere deep under muscle, know the code of the body, straining to hide our first great hurt. Our obsession with flight is proof that a man's anguish is sometimes avian, as if we could keep secret the memory of those callow bones first breaking through the tender skin of our simple human backs. Thank you.
We have to, are you going to hand the mic around?
So Lauren and Pat will now take a few questions. Hi. So, Lauren,
Hi, Bernie.
on social media today,
Oh, God. Go on.
You wrote that you wrote this book for your son. So, first of all, are you all right?
As far as I know. I'm not asking too many questions.
And so, what do you mean by that, given the nature of the book?
So, I think at my most... So this is the first book I've written from the perspective of a woman. It's the first novel I've written from the perspective of a mother. When other people have asked me this question, and a lot of people have, I've come up with stories, like as though somehow a novel isn't just an accumulation of everything that you've thought about and learned since the last time you sat down to write one, or since your life started. I mean, there's no origin story for anything I write. There's just an accumulation of weird interests and obsessions and memories. But I think what I wanted to do in this novel, or what really animated writing it, was that I really love my son so much in ways that he will never understand, maybe if he ever has kids of his own, but maybe, I don't know. But it would be nice if he knew. But there's no way to say that to someone without terrifying them, like, I just love you so much. That's a great way to send him rushing to a therapist. So I just wrote it in a book instead.
Just came to me, Lauren, so forgive me, but do you think that a mother could write such a book without dying of cancer in the process? Or is that a prerequisite?
I think it's very important before writing a book to die of cancer. I don't, the cancer, so it's funny, the cancer is sort of a situation as opposed to a plot, right? Having cancer is not a plot. Having cancer is just a lousy set of circumstances. So I needed a lousy set of circumstances to get her started, and I needed her to, when I write a novel, it's in part taking a character I really love and feel strongly for and just squashing them under pressure after pressure after pressure, and then seeing what she can do in the face of all that pressure. So here, she has cancer, she has an ex-boyfriend who's now married to someone else, she has a kid she loves, and she has all the stuff she wants to tell him. And I don't think cancer has to be the animating pressure here, but it works. And I mean, it's a big one, right? And so, and it forces her to reckon with big things. So I don't know that cancer was crucial to the story, actually. I think her, just her being a mother was.
Is this on?
Who gave Greg the
it is
mic?
on. But I know.
He's gonna call me up and ask me a question.
No, man, that was fantastic. I'm wondering for my own practice. I'm kind of looking for advice here. I'm listening to the way you set up the poems, and it's really interesting that the stories are so interesting just in and of themselves, and yet when we get into the poem, you also have this virtuosity with the images and the specificity of so there's the chipboard, the cheap chipboard that covers the broken window, right? And so how do you, I think one of the things that gets me lost in the process of writing is I get distracted by the specific images, and it's too much fun, and then I lose track of the narrative. So how do you keep that balance?
It's a good question. Like that new poem, I'm not sure how far along that poem is. I'm gonna have to go back, dig into it. Clearly, that new poem it's putting together, has a lot more of a lyric impulse than some of my other narrative poems. But for my narrative poems, maybe it's true of my lyric poems, but certainly of my narrative poems, I'm always trying to talk to somebody, trying to talk to one person, and that helps it give a kind of continuity so that no matter how many kinds of lyric leaps I take, it's, the fancy word, it's an economy of signification. You got, you're addressing one person, you have an economy of signification, you already have a system, a lexicon, because your address is a single person. So I mean, from my first book, man, you know this. The dudes I grew up with weren't going to read books, but they were going to read mine, so I pick one of them, you know? And certainly there's things in the poems that they're not going to get, but I want there to be enough, I think, enough of a narrative, enough of something for them to hold on to.
Can I ask you the same question? Because I was also interested in the formal choice. So we hear "don't write in the second person," and you seem to skirt the dangers of that by addressing the boy. So what point did that formal decision get made?
From the very beginning, so one of the things I was thinking about in the sort of accumulation of memory and experience that goes into writing a novel, a friend of mine's mother died when I met her while she was my college roommate, but her mother died while she was in high school, and her mother left her letters that were FedExed to her, actually, by her father over various moments in her life. So college graduation, marriage, the birth of her first child. And these letters were really burdensome, actually. They were not what you'd think. They were not like a hug from the grave. They were like admonishments and warnings and motherly stuff, right? But it's hard to fight with your mom when she's dead, and you don't really. It's a conversation you're not going to win. And I think when I was thinking about this book and thinking about how a mother might express her abiding sort of passion and her wish to remain on this earth after she was gone, and a book seems like the right way to do this. I was thinking about those letters a little bit. And I was also thinking that Karen's not a writer, so she wouldn't sit down to write a book. She would only sit down to write a book for her son. And so there was no way around it, really. If she was going to write this thing, she was going to write to Jake. And she's never taken a creative writing class, so she doesn't know you're not supposed to write in the second person. Oh, she's pretty amazing, I think. And yet.
Well, how about we do the rest of the questions over food and...
Do we have cheese?
I hope so.
Oh, well, you guys are in for a treat.
Thank you all.
No more cheese? We have fruit. We have vegetables. We have wine.
We have fruit, we have cheese, we have books. Thank you all.